The alarm woke me before the light did, and my hands found my boots before my mind found the reason. 3 years ago, we lost a war we never understood, against a species that called itself the Korath, and the peace they gave us came with a single document nobody in our government wanted to sign, but everyone had to. The treaty had one line that mattered more than all the others: no advanced weapons. That was it. 4 words that decided how humanity would live from then on. I am Daniel Voss, and I was the human liaison officer on the colony of Aldergrove, a rust-colored world at the edge of space that nobody wanted until the Korath decided it sat on a trade route worth fighting over. My job was simple on paper: keep the peace, report violations, make sure the humans under my watch never gave the Korath a reason to end the treaty, and finish what they started. That morning, the reason found us anyway. The comms officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Louisa Fenwick, burst into my quarters without knocking, which she never did. "Ships," she said. "Not ours. Not Korath either." I was already moving. Outside, the sky over Aldergrove had gone the color of a bruise, streaked with the burn trails of vessels dropping out of high orbit too fast, too many, too close together. I counted 6 before I stopped counting and started running. We reached the command dome in under 4 minutes, and by then, the picture was already clear enough to turn my stomach. The ships belonged to a group called the Skarn Combine, raiders who worked the edges of Korath space, striking colonies too small or too poor to defend themselves, then vanishing before any real power could respond. They had watched us for weeks, maybe longer. They knew about the treaty. They knew what it meant. It meant we had no shields worth mentioning, no plasma cannons, no drone swarms, no smart missiles, no networked defense grid, because every single piece of that kind of hardware had been cataloged, sealed, and monitored by Korath inspectors, who visited twice a year with scanners built to sniff out the faintest whisper of an energy weapon. The Skarn commander opened a channel before his ships had even finished their descent. His voice came through flat and amused, the tone of someone who has done this many times and expects no surprises. "Human colony," he said, "surrender your resources, and your people will not be harmed. Resist, and the treaty that protects you means nothing to us. We are not signatories. We do not care what your masters allow you to carry." Beside me, Louisa's face had gone pale, but her jaw was set hard. "He is right," she whispered. "We have nothing. They stripped it all." I looked past her, through the dome's reinforced window, at the 6 ships settling into the valley beyond our perimeter fence, and something old and stubborn woke up in the back of my skull. "Not everything," I said. She looked at me like I had lost my mind, and maybe I had, but I was already moving toward the door, already thinking about the storage building on the south edge of the colony, the one the Korath inspectors walked past every single visit without a second glance, because to them, it looked like nothing more than a museum, a room full of dead technology from a species too primitive to have ever built a starship on its own. They were wrong, and they had been wrong for 3 years, and nobody had ever bothered to correct them. I keyed my radio as I ran. "Every able body, report to the old armory, south perimeter, now. Bring nothing you think is a weapon. Bring everything you know is a tool." The colony of Aldergrove had 1,100 people, mostly engineers, farmers, and the families of people like me who had been sent out here to keep watch. It also had, tucked away behind a door that said Agricultural Equipment and Historical Archive, a collection that our first colonial governor, a stubborn old man named Peter Ashcombe, had insisted on bringing along when we settled here. He said a people should never forget where they came from, and he had filled that room with replicas and restorations of human tools from every era we had crawled through on the way to the stars. Rifles that fired lead instead of light, blades forged from steel instead of grown from crystal lattice, powder charges packed by hand, the kind of chemistry so old that no Korath scanner had ever been built to look for it, because their own civilization had leapt straight from stone tools to fusion power in a single violent century, skipping everything in between. To them, gunpowder was not a weapon, it was history, a curiosity, a museum piece behind a door nobody bothered to open. By the time I reached the armory, 40 people were already there, and more were coming. Peter Ashcombe himself stood in the doorway, 80 years old, and grinning like a man who had been waiting 3 years for someone to finally need what he had saved. "I told the council we would need this room someday," he said. "Nobody believed an old fool." "I believe you now," I told him. "Open it." The doors swung wide, and for a moment everyone just stood there, staring at rows of rifles and revolvers polished and oiled and ready, at crates of black powder charges meant for mining the deep rock beneath the colony, at coils of steel cable, at blades long and short, at the quiet, patient weight of everything humanity had ever used to survive before we learned to split atoms. Louisa Fenwick picked up a bolt-action rifle like it might bite her. "This is insane," she said. "This is going up against warships with this." "Ships need engines," I said. "Engines need people to run them. People can be stopped without a single joule of energy weapon fire, and the treaty never said a word about that, because the people who wrote it never imagined we would need to." Peter Ashcombe was already handing out crates. "Listen to me," he called out, and 1,100 frightened colonists, most of whom had never held anything more dangerous than a pruning tool, turned to listen to an old man who suddenly did not look old at all. "Our ancestors did not have starships," he said. "They did not have shields or scanners or anything the Korath would call advanced, and yet they built empires. They crossed oceans in wood and canvas. They fought and endured, and outlasted things far larger than themselves, because they understood something the Korath never had to learn. You do not need the biggest weapon. You need the smartest use of the ones you have." A young farmer named Owen Whitfield raised his hand, holding a coil of blasting cable from the mining stores. "What about the ships? Bullets will not touch a hull like that." "We are not aiming for the hull," I said, and the plan came together in my head as I spoke it aloud. "We aim for what they need to leave. Their engines are shielded against energy weapons and kinetic impactors, because that is what the Korath and every other advanced power fights with. Nobody builds armor against a mining charge set by hand in a maintenance access shaft, because nobody expects a colony with no weapons to have a way inside their own ship in the first place." Owen's eyes widened. "We do not need to beat them. We need to strand them." "Exactly," I said. The plan split into pieces fast. A group led by Louisa would take defensive positions along the perimeter fence with the rifles, not to win a fight in the open, but to slow any advance and force the Skarn raiders to commit troops to a fight they did not expect. Another group, led by Owen and the colony's mining engineers, would use the tunnel network beneath Aldergrove, dug years ago to reach mineral deposits, to come up beneath the raiders' ships from ground nobody had thought to guard, because why would you guard the ground beneath you against a species with no advanced weapons? I would lead a third group toward the command ship itself, the one flying the commander's banner, because a raid loses its nerve fast when the person giving orders stops being able to give them. Peter Ashcombe insisted on coming, and I did not have the heart or the time to argue. We moved before the Skarn commander finished his second demand for surrender. The perimeter fence held for exactly as long as it needed to. Louisa's team, spread thin along the tree line with rifles that had not fired an angry shot in 3 generations, opened up the moment the first Skarn troops crossed into range. The sound was strange and old, a sharp crack instead of the hum of an energy discharge, and I heard later that the raiders' armor, built to shrug off plasma bolts and deflect kinetic slugs from mass drivers, had never been tested against a slow lead round fired from a rifled barrel at close range. It was not built to stop something so simple, because nothing that simple was supposed to still exist. The Skarn advance stumbled, not stopped, but stumbled, confused, uncertain, exactly what we needed. Underground, Owen's team moved through tunnels dug for ore, carrying charges packed for breaking rock, and they came up through maintenance shafts that no Skarn engineer had thought to seal, because sealing against ground assault from an unarmed colony had never made their checklist. I heard the first charge go off through the soles of my boots before I heard it in the air, a deep shuddering thump that told me one of the 6 ships had just lost the ability to lift off this world ever again. My own team reached the edge of the valley, as the Skarn commander's voice crackled back over the open channel, no longer flat, no longer amused. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Report. What weapon are they using?" Nobody answered him, because nobody on his crew could answer him. Their scanners, tuned to catch the telltale signature of plasma discharge or the electromagnetic pulse of a railgun, saw nothing. To their instruments, we were still unarmed. We were still exactly what the treaty promised, harmless. We reached the command ship's landing struts through a drainage culvert that ran beneath the valley floor, one more piece of old-fashioned engineering that had never shown up on any Korath inspection because it moved water instead of energy. Peter Ashcombe, breathing hard but steady, helped me set the last charge against the strut housing, his hands as sure as they must have been decades ago before he ever left the world humanity was born on. "You should go back," I told him. "I have waited 3 years to be useful again," he said. "I am not going anywhere." We pulled back through the culvert as the charge went, and the ship tilted hard, groaning as one strut buckled beneath it, throwing its own defensive systems into confusion as internal alarms blared for a threat their sensors could not identify or locate. By the time we climbed out into open air again, the battle had turned into something closer to a rout. 2 Skarn ships sat crippled in the valley, their engines fouled by charges set in places no advanced sensor had thought to watch. A third had tried to lift away and clipped a support pylon that Owen's team had weakened from below, sending it into a slow, ugly landing that ended any thought its crew had of leaving quickly. Along the fence line, the Skarn ground troops, expecting no resistance at all, found themselves pinned by fire from a weapon their own history books, if they kept such things, would have called obsolete before their species ever left its home world. The Skarn commander's voice came through the open channel one last time, and all the amusement was gone from it now, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "This is not possible," he said. "You have no advanced weapons. Our scanners confirm it. There is nothing here that should be able to do this." I keyed my own radio, standing in the drainage culvert with Peter Ashcombe beside me, and the sound of a stranded warship groaning above us. "You are right," I told him. "We have no advanced weapons. We have old ones. Nobody ever thought to write a treaty against those, because nobody ever imagined we would still need them." There was a long silence on the channel. Then the Skarn commander did the only thing left to a man whose ships could not fly and whose troops could not advance. He called a retreat, gathering what forces he could still move, leaving 2 ships and their crews behind in the valley, and vanished back into the sky with the 4 vessels still capable of flight, streaking away from Aldergrove far faster than they had arrived. The colony held. We did not celebrate that night, not really, because 1,100 people had just discovered how close they had come to losing everything, and grief and relief tend to arrive together and take time to sort themselves out. But by morning, when the sun came up rust-colored and quiet over a valley that still held 2 broken enemy ships, something had shifted in the way people stood, in the way they spoke to each other. We had been told for 3 years that we were defenseless. We had believed it, mostly, because the people who told us had the ships and the weapons to make us believe it. The Korath Treaty inspectors arrived 4 days later, summoned by a distress signal the Skarn had sent before their retreat, curious, and more than a little alarmed by reports of a colony successfully repelling an armed raid while officially possessing no weapons capable of doing so. The inspector who led the delegation was a tall, careful being named Vesic Thorn Uldane, a name I never quite learned to pronounce correctly, and one he never seemed to mind me getting wrong. He walked the perimeter fence, examined the crippled ships, questioned survivors from the stranded Skarn crews, and finally came to stand in front of the old armory building, its doors still open, its shelves still holding what remained of Peter Ashcombe's museum. He picked up one of the rifles, turning it over in long, fingered hands, studying it the way a scholar studies something ancient and strange. "This weapon predates your spaceflight by centuries," he said. "It uses chemical propulsion, a solid projectile, no energy signature at all." "Yes," I said. "And this is what defeated an armed raiding force. This is part of what defeated them," I said. "The rest was knowing the ground better than they did, and knowing that a treaty written by people who never had to walk before they could fly leaves a great deal of room for people who did." Vesic Thorn Uldane set the rifle down carefully, almost reverently, and was quiet for a long moment. "The treaty was written to prevent an arms race," he said finally, "to keep your species from rebuilding the technology that threatened us. It was not written to account for what came before that technology. We assumed, I think, that anything from before was no longer relevant. A ladder you climb and then leave behind. Some ladders are worth keeping, I said, in case you ever need to climb down again. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression, some careful, calculating shift, told me that whatever the Korath had believed about humanity before that day, they did not believe it anymore. They did not rewrite the treaty, not right away, and maybe not ever, because rewriting it would mean admitting how badly they had misjudged what advanced actually meant. But the inspections changed after that. The scanners grew more thorough, sweeping for things that had nothing to do with energy signatures at all, hunting for chemistry and metallurgy, and the quiet ingenuity of a species that had spent most of its history building things with nothing but hands and fire and stubbornness. And still they found things, because you cannot catalog every idea a person might have, and you cannot write a law broad enough to ban imagination. Peter Ashcombe passed away 2 years later, old age finally catching the man that 6 warships could not, and the colony buried him beneath a marker that simply read, "He kept the ladder." I still serve as liaison on Aldergrove, though my job has changed since that morning. I still watch for violations, still file my reports, still shake hands with careful, long-fingered beings who measure our worth by the treaties we sign. But I know something now that I did not know before, something I try to remember every time a new inspector walks through our gates with a scanner built to catch the future and blind to the past. The treaty said no advanced weapons, and we kept our word, every single time, because the weapons that saved us were never advanced at all. They were older than the treaty, older than the war, older than the first ship that ever left our world behind. They were the tools of people who had learned, long before the stars, that survival never depended on having the newest thing in your hand. It depended on knowing exactly what you already had, and being willing, when the moment came, to use it.